This is a Samsung Galaxy S3 LCD replacement. I'm going to give this one a difficulty rating of 5 out of 10, just based on the fact that you have to be a little careful on the inside when you get to the flex cables and adhesive. Other than that, it's not too tough. So what we're going to do here is also going to be a color conversion. This is a broken LCD. It might be a little hard to see, but there's definitely a crack running through it. And I don't recommend trying to replace just the glass. That never ends up working very well. Definitely never going to be like it was when it was brand new. So what we're going to do is we've got a complete assembly with the mid-frame installed. So this will save you some time and not be as messy because you don't have to pry the glass out of the mid-frame. These replacements come already pre-assembled. You're just going to have to transfer over some of the internal components, and you can see this comes with the back door and part of the rear housing. There is one piece that is not included at the top, you'll see shortly. But these are really the best way to go as far as replacing your screen. And as you know, all of the money in the Galaxy S3 is the actual AMOLED display. So once those are broken, you really have to replace the whole thing. And they're not cheap, but it will save you some money if you do it yourself. So we're going to replace remove the back panel, the battery, and in this case, the SIM card was not cut properly, so it's a little tricky to get this one out. Normally, you'll just push them in and they'll eject. This one I actually had to pry a little bit because the customer tried to carve it out of a full-size SIM card themselves, and it's a little on the large side. So once we get that out, we'll trim it down later on. Make sure you remove your microsd card if you have one. This one, we've got a total of 10 screws on the back, so make sure you remove all of these silver screws all the way around before you start prying on anything. And once you take these out, you're going to pry a little bit down on the bottom. You can even kind of start from the side. There's a soft spot where you can grip the panel. But you want to make sure you release the clips on the bottom so you don't break anything. In this case, it wouldn't be too crucial if you broke the case itself because we're going to replace that. But you don't want to do any damage to the charging port. So just be really careful. Once you unclip the bottom, this whole thing will just slide right out. That's the only thing that really seems to be holding it in place besides the screws. So we'll take that off and set it aside. If you wanted to, we do need to remove this top panel right here. I would probably, before you start prying, disconnect the flex cable that you're going to see me unplug in just a second. There's a pop connector right near the center, and you don't want to yank this off until you've actually disconnected that. But at that point, you can start prying around the edges here. And again, this just clips into place, so make sure you do unplug this pop connector in the center before you go too far. And that is for your external speaker. And once you remove that, you'll have access to all the internals here that we need to disconnect. Several pop connectors and also the antenna cables, which will be secured at the top and the bottom. So we'll start with the main LCD connector here that is plugged in, and then you will also have an antenna wire here, top and bottom, that runs through a little channel on the side of the mid-frame. Also, we've got several cables that we need to disconnect from the top. And as you may remember, Samsung likes to, if you watch any of my other videos, Samsung likes to use a lot of glue with their speakers. So there is one screw down here at the bottom that secures the logic panel, logic board to the mid-frame. Once you remove that, you can kind of start lifting this up. Make sure you disconnect the antenna wire here. And then at the top, you're going to want to be very careful because what happens is just glue basically is what you're going to have to watch out for, adhesive that's underneath this panel. So if you have to, you can use some heat to help dislodge this here. And then we might have one more flex cable I believe we had to unplug at the top. And you can kind of take a look at how this goes into the new frame. What I'm going to do is before I transfer all of the internals over, I am going to just do a test run and go ahead and make sure you take all these little plastic things off. You've got adhesive inside here, and you can see my power button came out there, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So what I want to do is just put the logic board into the new LCD, plug in the battery, and make sure it lights up, because if you go too far, you're going to have a hard time returning this if you happen to be unlucky and get a defective one. So we always do a test run before we put too much of the equipment inside the phone. And I'm going to go ahead and put this screw, after I magnetize, put the screw down here into the bottom, so we make sure everything's grounded properly. Plug in the LCD, and then we'll go ahead and stick the battery inside. And as you can see, I actually have a power button now. What happened earlier is I had a heck of a time getting that power button to go in, And you can see that the screen is actually working. When I get to the volume buttons, I'll explain the tricky part about the power buttons. They're really odd. They actually go in from the outside of the mid-frame. So we can see this is lighting up, verify that it's going to charge correctly and that the touch screen is actually functioning, and then we will proceed to the next step. Now this phone has a lock pattern on it, so I can't fully test the touchscreen, but we're going to assume that everything's working properly. Go ahead and power it down, and from here we will disconnect the battery, disconnect the charger, and go ahead and remove the logic board because there are a few components that have to go underneath. So what I've done is I've set these two side by side so you can kind of see what needs to be switched over. You've got a speaker down here at the bottom, your antenna wire, part of the antenna assembly, the front-facing camera, and there's a little bracket, little metal piece that comes out here that has a screw holding it into place. So I find the easiest thing to do is just remove this stuff and transfer it over as soon as possible. That way you don't risk making any mistakes. You might need to use some heat up here to get this cable. There's a flex cable that runs along the top that's pretty sensitive, so you want to be really careful with this stuff when you're working against the adhesive that they put underneath it. The PCB at the top and the flex cables obviously have a certain amount of flexibility, but you don't want to put too much stress on them because it is possible to rip or break them. And of course, if you're poking around with a sharp object like I am with the speaker here, be very careful not to puncture anything. I'm just using that to kind of grip the edge. Same with this pry tool here. We just want to get underneath the parts that we're prying, but not put too much pressure onto any part of them. And they've got a little piece of tape here holding the antenna wire into that channel, so we'll just peel that off and set it aside for now. Up here at the top we've got a little rubber gasket that comes out, and we've also got our front-facing camera there, probably with even more glue underneath. Okay, so we will need that little rubber gasket. What that does is it routes the sound into the upper microphone so that when you're using your speakerphone, people can hear you talking. So make sure you don't misplace that. That is definitely a requirement. Once you remove that, you can get under this little metal bracket after we've removed the screw from it, and that comes out also. From here you can remove your front-facing camera. And again, they've got a little adhesive underneath there, so you might need to pry it a little bit. And we've got it attached to a little cable, or yeah, a little bit of sticky stuff underneath there. And then, of course, once we've got the speaker released, we've got this little piece at the top that's got to come out. You can see the flex cable here, and I start to peel this off, but I'm going to go ahead and remove the antenna wire assembly before I go any further, because we've actually got to take the volume buttons off to finish that step. So here, be really careful. Again, you'll have a certain amount of flexibility, but you don't want to let your hand slip and end up doing any damage to this upper area. And again, we've got adhesive underneath here, so if you have to, you can hit it with the heat gun first, and then you're going to need to have something that can kind of get under there. I've got a pre-dulled razor blade with a nice sharp corner to it, so it makes it a little easier to get into tight spots. It's a little tough to do that with most pry tools. So just very carefully get underneath here, just enough to get it started. And then from there, I switched over to an ice pick, which gives you a little bit of kind of a probe effect, so you can kind of get underneath there. But again, be very careful when you're poking around inside here. Doesn't take much force. It's just the direction that you get underneath it at. And so we'll go ahead and pull that out. There's a little bit of adhesive tape underneath here. We'll try to keep that, as much of that as we can, so that when we put it in the new frame, it'll set down properly. And if that's bent at all, you can kind of straighten it out a little bit. Go ahead and set that inside. And this upper flex cable that we were working on is actually attached to the volume control. So what we're going to do is remove the volume buttons. You'll see they actually push outward, which seems kind of counterintuitive, but that's the way the power button is also installed. And once you remove the buttons, you'll be able to get underneath this cable and remove the entire assembly. And you'll see momentarily here that I actually have to remove the buttons from the new housing because you can't get these into the right position unless you do. And just a note here, when you're working with the power button, you'll see that it's very difficult to get it lined up properly. And the key to installing the power button properly is to make sure that you pull the two plastic tabs from the outside all the way inside of the center, all the way inside of the midframe, because if you don't, your power button will never sit straight. I had to fool around with that for a little while before I finally figured it out. So I've edited that part out of the video, but hopefully you'll see what I'm talking about. I may make an additional video later on to kind of demonstrate that. So you'll see here I'm putting the flex cable back in with the button already installed, and it just doesn't seat properly. So I did have to go ahead and remove this volume button and ended up putting the wrong volume button in. This is one of the things that happens when you've got a lot of parts sitting on your desk. So I did switch that over after I finished, which you'll also see. So plenty of demonstration here as far as removing and reinstalling the volume control button. So once this comes out, you'll have a much easier time getting the volume control situated properly. And of course, once you get the button back in, you want to make sure that both of those are functioning. So if you press the up and down volume, you'll be able to tell that they're clicking on the inside, and that's what we would need to make sure of before we put anything else together. So you can see I just realized that I put the silver power volume control button in instead of the blue. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that out again. Put this one back in, and now we can go ahead to the next step, which is going to be installing the front-facing camera and then that little metal bracket and the rubber piece at the top. Make sure everything's lining up properly there. They have some guidelines you can kind of follow. There's a little hole at the top that shows you where that flex cable goes. Now we're going to have to remove the bottom speaker here, and I will show the removal. Unfortunately, I went off camera when I was reinstalling it, but there's not much to this. You just want to heat it up. Make sure you pry that away without doing any damage to the PCB or to the speaker itself, and then just transfer that over to the new mid-frame immediately. On this one, I didn't manage to get all of the adhesive out with the speaker, so I did cut an extra piece and put it underneath there just to hold it into place when I put it into the new frame. And again, you have a certain amount of flexibility with this board, but be very careful. You don't want to do any damage to that. And once again, as usual, they just go crazy with the adhesive under here, so it might take a little effort and a little patience to get this off. Okay, so I've already installed the lower speaker, and now we're going to go ahead and make sure all the cables are out of the way and put the logic board back into the new phone. Excuse me, back into the new midframe. And you also want to transfer your barcode label over from the old one. I don't show that step in the video, And I also don't show putting the screws back in, because right now what we're going to do is go ahead and put the logic board in, connect all the antenna wires, power it up, make sure everything's functioning properly. But do make sure that you put your screws back in before you finish. And before, you can see that the one thing that they don't replace, this little white piece at the top, won't make a big difference from the outside of the phone. You're not really going to see it other than the headset jack area. But it didn't end up looking bad at all, and the customer was very happy about the color conversion. Don't forget you got one screw that goes down here into the logic board. Make sure we install that. And if you plug the top flex into the back, go ahead and put the bottom panel on. This should snap into place. Everything should set flush. And we'll go ahead and put the SIM card in, pop in the battery, put the rear panel on, make sure everything's lining up properly. Do inspect the perimeter of the phone, make sure everything's snapped into place properly. And then you can add your screws in, power it up, and you should be good to go. I hope you guys found this useful. Please hit the like button if you found this helpful. Feel free to share this with your friends and subscribe to my channel. Good luck with your repair, and thanks for watching.